Washington Journal continues.
Joining us, Representative Marcy Kaptur, a Democrat from Ohio, a member of the Appropriations Committee, and here to talk about matters of trade and U.S. manufacturing. Good morning.
Good morning, Pedro.
How has Mr. Trump done so far in matters of trade?
Well, I don't think he's gotten into it enough yet. It was one of his major campaign promises. Certainly, if you look at states like Ohio and adjoining states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, his vice president is from Indiana. These are big manufacturing states. And he carried them, especially on the promise of a change in the approach of the federal government to jobs and trade. So we're waiting. It's already the fourth month, and one of the reasons I appreciate being able to be on your program today is because I have a company that is immediately threatened, and we need the president's attention, to U.S. Steel in Lorain, Ohio, and its adjacent plant, Republic, right next door. One is shuttered. The other one is likely to be shuttered in June. The president could put an embargo and help us to get loan guarantees to hold the production as the market recovers here at home. But these companies are victims of dumping. Dumping by China, dumping by Korea, dumping by Russia.
We heard the president leading up to his even formal start in office visiting companies, specifically talk about these issues. Any indication that he would visit the company you're concerned about or address these issues?
He has my warmest invitation to visit. I've spoken with Secretary Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, invited him. Senators Brown and Portman have joined me in this effort. This is really the poster child for what's wrong. Major manufacturing, very modernized company, the hardest working workers in the world, and then to be delivered this kind of message because of dumping. The particular product that's made at this plant in Lorain is a type of tubular steel that's used in gas drilling. All right? And we know that there's a lot of shakeout in the oil and gas markets. However, we should not be replacing U.S.-made tube with Chinese tube or Korean tube. It should be U.S. made. The president was at the building trades here in Washington yesterday. He talked about rebuilding America, using American product. That includes steel.
We have a little bit of the president talking about the state of manufacturing from that event. Let you listen to what he had to say and get your thoughts on it.
Right.
If you look at what's happened with Ford and with General Motors and with Fiat Chrysler and so many other car companies, you see what they're doing back in Michigan and Ohio. They were leaving. They were going to Mexico and many other places. They're now staying here. Now, I did say, Reed knows this very well because you've seen me say it many times to the big auto companies at meetings, it's okay. Enjoy your new plant. Please send me a picture. I'm sure it's going to be lovely. But when you make your car or when you make your air conditioner and you think you're going to fire all of our workers and open up a new place in another country, and you're going to come through our what will be a very strong border, which is already, you see what's happened, 61% down now in terms of illegal people coming in. Way down in terms of drugs pouring into our country and poisoning our youth. Way down. General Kelly's done a great job. But when you think you're going to sell that car or that air conditioner through our border, it's not going to happen. You're going to have a tax. And the tax may be 35%. And you know what? Every single major company that I've had that conversation with has said, you know, we've decided to stay in the United States. It's amazing. And you would have thought they would have said this, frankly, for years, but nobody's ever said it.
So that was the car companies, but is there any takeaway, particularly on the taxing side, that would apply to manufacturing overall and concerns you might have?
I think that for the manufacturing industry, and certainly for steel, which is a major ingredient in automotive manufacturing, we have to have that production here as well. And the manner in which these imports just flood in here, if you look at our trade deficit annually now, it's $500 billion. I call it red ink. But it comes out of the hides of America's workers, and we need the president's attention to each of the categories of that trade deficit, which is really an inverted tax, in a sense, on the American people, where their desire to be employed is displaced by product coming in from abroad that isn't being traded by the rules. But in fact, what's happening in China, I just might mention, they're manufacturing so much steel that they actually exceed in their manufacturing global demand by about 800 million metric tons. So it's a flood on the global market. And you can talk about taxes all you want, but when that product comes to the shore and is dumped out in these ports, and then it gets into the production line, it snuffs out manufacturing. And Lorain, Ohio is not the only place in America that's impacted. We need the president to help us to work out the same thing we did in the automotive industry, to save the fundamental manufacturing capacity, especially at plants that are modernized and have a very good workforce, in anticipation of a more regularized market where we were not being harmed by imports. It's going to take 3 to 4 years to get there, but we need that adjustment. That's what I asked Secretary Ross for.
Well, let's hear from viewers who want to talk to you and ask you questions. Our first one is from Arkansas, Democrats line. Keith for our guest, Representative Marcy Kaptur. Go ahead.
Hi, Keith.
Yes, good morning, Ms. Castor.
Good morning.
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to say that I think that the president could lead by bringing his manufacturing back to the United States, and that would help, and encourage other people to move their manufacturing back to the United States. But I'd also like to say that
I agree with you.
Capitol building is gorgeous, and I'd like to thank the fellows that worked on it, because I'm a contractor, and it sure is pretty. In the sunshine, it's shiny and beautiful, and President Obama done a good job. And I love you, ma'am, and you're doing such a good job.
Sorry about that, but thank you. Anything from that.
The Capitol belongs to you, sir, and to the American people. If we look back in our history, the Capitol was actually built by slaves. None of their names are on the Capitol. The dome itself was cast from metal that was saved by President Lincoln from actually cannonballs that were used during the Civil War. And of course, the workers who modernized the Capitol and fixed it up now, their names aren't there either. But we know we are indebted to them. They know who they are. And we appreciate them that they have done such a great job of preserving America's seat of the legislative branch, which is Article 1 of the Constitution. The executive is Article 2. I'm very mindful of that.
Harry from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Republican line.
Yeah, in the 70s I worked in steel mills and oil fields, and I'll tell you, other than the fact it's sad we lost these jobs, it's amusing that you as a Democrats started this with regulations, this phony global warming and NAFTA, and now you're calling on Trump who wants to avoid all this, and you people are doing everything you can to stop him from doing this. Now you're on asking him for more help. You don't find anything hypocritical about this, do you? I certainly do. I lost 2 jobs over this nonsense, and you people started it.
Sir, how did you lose your job? Talk about it. Talk about how did you lose your job, sir?
First of all, it was when Carter was in the office. He put regulations on steel mills. He put them on refineries. He put them on nuclear plants, and he put them on oil plants. I worked in that business. I was working 1,300 hours a year overtime, and just like that, it stopped. Then in the 90s, NAFTA with Clinton. Okay, then the global warming nonsense, which is nonsense. The people proving global warming are being paid by the government to prove it, not to disapprove it or see if it's true. And I'd like to see the debate on this, because other scientists who make money publishing the truth on this are keeping their jobs, and they'll argue this.
Okay, Harry, thank you. We put a lot out there for our guests.
Thank you, sir, for being a responsible worker and wanting to build this country and our economy forward. Thank you so much. On the NAFTA issue, no one fought against NAFTA harder than did I. And a majority of Democrats voted no on NAFTA. If you go back and you look at that vote in 1993, a majority of Republicans voted for it. So President Trump is actually has a different position than the majority of people in his own party. Now, maybe they've changed if you look at the current members, but not really. It was a majority of Democrats that did not favor the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We were able to stop that, and a majority of Republicans favored it. So the trade issue is a very complicated issue, and yes, it has caused the loss of millions and millions of jobs in this country. NAFTA and all of the follow-on agreements that have allowed closed markets in other places to remain and our market to become the dump market of the world for all these goods coming in here. You can't sustain a $500 billion, $500 billion trade deficit year after year after year and not have that impact your job, people's wages, the level at which they're paid, their benefits. People work harder for less. In my part of the country, people are earning probably $7,000 less a year than they did at the beginning of this century. Trade has an enormous impact, and maybe this is an issue where we can work with the president. We don't want closed markets, we want open markets, but our market shouldn't be the only open market. Others should open up, and where that doesn't occur, we have to have smarter trade agreements.
Earl is next. St. Louis, Missouri, Democrats line.
Hi, how you doing today?
Welcome.
I heard you say about the Republican Party, maybe I misunderstood you, saving the automobile industry, particularly during Trump's presidency. It was a Democratic Party that done that under President Bush, under President Obama's administration. And I work for Chrysler. I'm a retiree, and if it weren't for him, a lot of us today, particularly Chrysler and General Motors, would not have a job. And as far as your steel mills and stuff, we had a paper at St. Louis Post-Dispatch that showed a article in 1938 about the smog. It was so bad in St. Louis that you could hardly breathe. But anyway, thank you for your time and let me speak. But it wasn't the Republican Party that saved the automobile industry. It was a Democratic Party. Thank you.
You are correct, sir. I don't think that I did say that. I think I talked about what we should do. President Trump should follow the same pattern as President Obama when we were able to refinance the automotive industry. And what I was saying is that the same thing should be done for the steel industry. We need that breathing time to recover, to reinvest. And you are correct. We need environmental regulation. I don't agree with the president to just let the air be polluted and the water be polluted. We need regulations because people who work in those industries, even as you said in the past, what St. Louis looked like, Toledo, Lorain, Cleveland, all these communities had higher levels of cancer, greater levels of asthma, even until today because of some of the manufacturing. So we became smarter. We became better. As a country, and people didn't lose their lives because of cancers caused by emittance to the atmosphere. I hope that the president doesn't take us backward on that, although if I look at his Environmental Protection Agency budget, he wants to cut that by a third and cut very important programs that have to do with clean water, clean air. Sometimes I think because the president, and I say this with all due respect and hope actually, sometimes he doesn't know the specifics just because he hasn't worked in this particular capacity before. So he'll find out, and we'll work it through the legislative process, and we'll do what's right for America.
The president signed a couple of executive orders on trade. One dealt with a study of the U.S. trade deficits that identify potential trade abuses. The other was more efficient enforcement of anti-dumping laws to keep foreign manufacturers from undercutting U.S. companies. How effective do you think these actions will be?
Well, I hope that he uses them sooner rather than later. I think they will be very helpful, and this issue of steel dumping is immediate. We need his help now. We can't wait. The workers who have gotten the pink slips will be furloughed. They'll be terminated in early June. So we need quick action on steel, and I hope that he hears this through his aides who might be listening, and that he convenes an immediate meeting on steel across this country, because there are literally thousands of workers' lives at stake and the capacity of these companies to function in the future.
Our guest previously served as a deputy secretary for the National Consumer Cooperative Bank, also a White House assistant director for urban affairs in the Carter White House. Marcy Kaptur from Ohio joining us. Next is from Crownsville, Maryland, Independent Line. We're talking to Carl. Hi, Carl. Carl from Maryland, good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to ask Ms. Kaptur, I realize this is probably a simplistic suggestion, but for all these trade agreements that are so complicated and apparently we can't get out of them, and a majority of American manufacturing has definitely gone overseas and is probably not coming back, is there any chance to amend these trade agreements to permit 50% of all imports and exports be shipped on American-built, American flag, and American-manned ships, since we basically no longer have a U.S. merchant marine anymore, not deep sea anyway?
Thank you very much for calling in. I represent all the ports on the southern tier of Lake Erie, so I'm very familiar with the Jones Act and with the number of ships that come into our ports that are not U.S. ships. And I obviously support the rebuilding of our shipping industry, our domestic shipping industry. It's going to take a little while to recover. I hope the president pays attention to it. I think that in terms of the imports coming in here, for example, most of them come through the two coasts. They don't come through the region that I represent because the Great Lakes is actually the fourth seacoast. It's not really even recognized sometimes by people who work here in Washington. And many of the vessels that call are from other countries. We have a lot of interlake trade. Those are all domestic vessels. They carry taconite from the mines up in Duluth down to the mills in Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. So we're very familiar with interlake trade in our region. But I think you have a very good suggestion. I don't think it'll happen that fast. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest problems we have is closed markets abroad. We allow, for instance, all this Chinese dumping, which we should never allow, but their market isn't open to our goods. Only some of our goods get in. There are all kinds of non-transparent barriers that they put up. Japan does the same thing, even Europe, if you look at the trade. So we need balanced trade. We need it to go both ways. And the president's correct in trying to do this study, but it shouldn't take this long. We know what's going on. We know where the goods are coming from and where we're not able to get goods into foreign markets. And I think that we need to have immediate engagement with those countries, one by one by one, in order to open those markets and then to figure out, well, if they're not, then what do we do here to adjust?
Can the president then achieve these kind of goals with the meeting with the Chinese president this week, even more so than other presidents have met on these type of issues with previous Chinese presidents?
Well, I'm hoping that they will have steel at the top of their agenda. I'm hoping that because the Chinese literally are manufacturing so much steel that they're filling up warehouses 50 times larger than the studio that we're in here, they can't sell it. And so there's this flood on the international market. And I'm hoping that the president and his advisors will hear this program here in Washington and that they will be very forceful and help to negotiate a way out of this for us and to change the trade arrangements that are prohibiting our ability to have two-way trade with China rather than, if you look at our trade deficit last year, we had about a $500 billion trade deficit. Over $350 billion was with China.
Here's Sue from Austin, Texas, Democrats line.
Hi, Representative Kaptur.
Hi.
I grew up in Amherst.
Oh.
So I know Lorain.
Yes, sir. Thanks very much, ma'am.
I know the kind of jobs that when we were in high school, we were either going to go to college or we were going to go to the Ford plant or the steel mills. I mean, you could get the training to become a skilled worker in both places. I remember in the late 70s, early 80s, a friend of mine who didn't choose to go to college ended up becoming a machinist at the steel mill. And he was bringing home over $800 a week, doing quite well. Then in the 90s, when it started to get the layoffs and get hit kind of hard, he ended up having to become a guard in Grafton, and I think he was making something like $10 an hour, and it was a big blow to his income. And yes, we had problems with pollution. We used to say the sky was always orange over Lorain back in the 60s and early 70s.
Sue, thank you so much for that, and we'll let our guest respond.
Thank you so much for calling in about the reality of living in industrial America. And the 21st century has to be better than the 20th. That's our goal. There are many workers from Amherst and Grafton communities that I have been privileged to represent in Ohio, whose workers today have been impacted by these new layoffs. And the people of Lorain County know well the price that America has paid for very, very unfair trade practices. So I thank you for calling in and being a voice for them.
Republican line, Juan from Houston, Texas.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ma'am, I I just want to know, it's more like a question, not a comment. I want to know what Donald Trump is trying to do. What is the agenda on the trade and the manufacturing? And are the Democrats trying to help with him? Are they trying to compromise with something and all that? I will listen to you. I will hang up and listen to whatever you got to say.
Thank you so very much from Texas, another big industrial state, very impacted by global trade. What I want is I want open markets, and I want balanced trade for our country with rising living standards for the people of our country, as well as other countries with which we trade. Trade should never result in people having worse options. That has not happened. Since NAFTA was passed in 1993, we know, those of us who fought it, knew what would happen. That agreement was simply with Canada and with Mexico. And the United States, over that period of time, has never had a single year in which our trade accounts were balanced. That means that people in our country were losing jobs to our trading partners, Canada and Mexico. And the people of Mexico's livelihoods were not bettered. Because wages went down. If you look at what's happened there, it's a great disruption in their marketplace. Many people who were thrown out of their production, they had little farms, they were thrown off their farms. Over 2 million farm families, which formed the basis of many of the undocumented workers that came to our country. NAFTA never solved what we knew would happen. In fact, the agreement. They stopped us from being able to provide adjustment provisions for the poorest people on the continent who would be impacted by trade. And so Texas became one of the recipient states for many of these undocumented workers. They're desperate people. And if trade agreements can't treat people as human beings, what are we doing? What are we doing as a country? We were the lead for the negotiation of that during the first George Bush administration and the second, and then it was signed by the Clinton administration. I fought that with every ounce of my being because I knew workers in my region would lose their jobs, and I knew what would happen to the poorest people on the continent. So we have to go back and do it right. What we should have done, and I'll make this very short, we should have had an agreement with nations that have our rule of law, where you could actually achieve an end in a court where it is transparent and open, and that would be with the European Union, and then invite other countries into that array of nations so that standards of living go up, that the quality of life goes up, that environmental health goes up, not down, that labor has a chance to earn a decent wage, goes up, not down. That is not what happened.
But before we go to our next call, I want to ask you, our previous guest, Representative Yoho, thought when asked about the possibility of a shutdown of government, he didn't seem to think it would happen. Do you share that thought?
That would certainly be my opinion, and I hope that the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate is able to put a bill together. They have until April 28th to get us in the 2017 fiscal year, which we've been in since last October 1st. So there should be dispatch. We should get this done. It creates great problems in the agencies for contracting, whether it's defense contracting or building roads or whatever. The agencies are very unable to contract in a normal way. So I hope he's correct. We need to do the business of the country and get on with it.
Serving on the Appropriations Committee, what's it like to be an appropriator these days?
Well, it's not like it used to be. It used to be that the chairs of the Appropriations Committee really moved their bills one at a time on the floor. Now everything gets backlogged up in the leadership, and too much power has risen to the top. The committees of jurisdiction should be allowed to do their work.
From Michigan, here is John on our independent line.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'd like to know when the Democrats, and you are right, it was the Republican Bush who did NAFTA, not the Democrats. You guys had a hard time fighting against it, but he was the one that did it, not the Democrats. Second of all, when are the people and the Democrats going to wake up and start fighting against the Republican, which is the group that has killed we the people? I live in Michigan. The Republicans, every time the people get a petition to change something, they overturn it and put an amendment on it so that it with cash, so you can't go out and do it. They've changed the amount of time that you can take and get to to take a petition up. They've looked at South Carolina, tried to get rid of, or tried to sequester the new incoming Democratic governor, and now it's with the Supreme Court justice, who they're going to go to the nuclear. When are people going to wake up and realize that they are the party that if they can't get their way, they're like a little baby kicking its feet and saying, I'm going to take my toy and I'm going to go home and I'm going to change the rules so I win all the time.
Caller, thanks.
Thank you very much for calling in. Well, Sue, you're an example of someone who has seen the light. And I have complete faith in the American people. And I know that if a situation is unfair, they will eventually right it once enough of them understand it. I will say this, you are correct. The decks are stacked against my party in over about 36 of the states. Ohio, for example, was gerrymandered in a way that even though we have half Democrats and half Republicans in our state, our congressional delegation, the Democrats are outnumbered 3-1. There are only 4 Democrats and there are 12 Republicans because of the way in which the state legislature drew the lines. And that was willfully done in many states across the union, and it creates a very, very unbalanced governance at the federal level and in those states. The American people are beginning to understand this. The next opportunity we'll have to change it is 2020 when these lines are redrawn. And I have a feeling that many of the states, the people of these states, are going to rebel and demand fair districting across this country so all Americans can have fair voice in our institutions of governance.
Representative Marcy Kaptur, Democrat of Ohio, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you very much, and thank your listeners.
Coming up, we're going to talk to Robert King of the Washington Examiner. He's been following this effort by House Republicans and the White House to come up with new text to repeal areas of the Affordable Care Act. We'll learn about how that effort is faring when he joins us next on Washington Journal.